What if everything you knew about human evolution was a lie? What if the reason we dominated this planet wasn't just intelligence, tools, or cooperation, but something far more ancient and terrifying? What if the myths weren't myths at all, but suppressed memories of what we really are? When 16-year-old Marcus Chen accidentally breathed fire during chemistry class, he thought his life was over. He had no idea it was just beginning. Because somewhere in the depths of space, ancient beings felt that flame ignite, and for the first time in millennia, they remembered their wayward children. The dragons were coming home to reclaim what had always been theirs, but Earth's children had grown strong in their absence, and humanity was about to discover why every culture in history had stories of dragon slayers. Marcus Chen had always been different, though he'd spent 16 years trying to convince himself otherwise. While other kids complained about being cold in winter, he walked through Chicago snowstorms in just a t-shirt. When everyone else got sick with the flu, his immune system fought off everything like it was nothing. His reflexes were faster, his vision sharper, and sometimes, when he got really angry, the air around him seemed to shimmer with heat. But none of that prepared him for what happened in Mr. D. Rodriguez's chemistry class on that ordinary Tuesday morning in October. They were working with Bunsen burners, mixing compounds to observe chemical reactions. Marcus had paired with Jenny Walsh, the girl who sat behind him in English and had never spoken to him, despite 3 years of shared classes. She was nervous, fumbling with the equipment, while Marcus tried to help without seeming too eager. "Just light it slowly," he said, reaching over to adjust her grip on the striker. Their hands touched briefly, and Jenny's eyes widened. "God, Marcus, your hands are burning up. Are you sick?" Before he could answer, Tommy Kruger, the linebacker who'd made Marcus's life miserable since middle school, knocked into their lab table while horsing around with his friends. The Bunsen burner toppled, its flames sputtering out as gas continued to hiss from the valve. "Watch it, Chen," Tommy sneered. "Try not to blow up the school. Fireboy." The nickname hit Marcus like a slat. Fireboy. They'd called him that since he was 12, when he'd somehow managed to start a campfire without matches during a Boy Scout trip. Everyone thought it was a magic trick. Marcus knew better. He'd felt something inside him that day, something hot and alive and dangerous. Now, as gas continued to leak from the overturned burner, Marcus felt that same heat building in his chest. His vision blurred at the edges, and his heartbeat thundered in his ears. Jenny was backing away, fear creeping across her face as she stared at him. "Marcus," she whispered. "Your eyes." He didn't know what she meant until he saw his reflection in the chrome surface of the lab table. His brown eyes had turned molten gold, and thin wisps of smoke were rising from his skin. Tommy was still laughing, still making jokes about the accident, when Marcus turned to face him. The heat in his chest was spreading now, flowing through his veins like liquid fire. Every breath felt like swallowing flames. "You want to see fire, boy?" Marcus said, his voice rougher than it should have been. And then, without thinking, without meaning to, he exhaled. The flame that burst from his lips wasn't the orange-yellow of a normal fire. It was blue-white at the center, hot enough to melt steel, and it shot across the lab table like a dragon's breath from the old stories. The gas from the broken burner caught instantly, creating a wall of fire that separated Marcus from the rest of the class. Screams erupted around him. Students dove under tables or ran for the exits. The fire alarm began its ear-splitting wail. Through the flames, Marcus could see Mr. Rodriguez shouting into his phone, probably calling 911. But Marcus barely heard any of it. Because in that moment, as impossible as it seemed, breathing fire felt natural. It felt right. Like he'd been holding his breath his entire life, and finally remembered how to exhale. The sprinkler system kicked in, dousing the flames and soaking everyone in the room. Marcus stood in the center of it all, steam rising from his skin as the cold water hit him. His eyes had returned to their normal brown, but he could still feel the heat simmering beneath the surface. Jenny was pressed against the far wall, staring at him with a mixture of terror and fascination. Tommy had fallen backwards over a chair and was scrambling toward the door on his hands and knees. "Mr. Egg?" Rodriguez was frozen in place, his phone hanging forgotten in his hand.
"I'm sorry," Marcus whispered, though he wasn't sure who he was apologizing to.
Then he turned and ran. The hallways were empty. Everyone was either in class or had evacuated when the fire alarm sounded. Marcus's wet sneakers squeaked against the polished floors as he sprinted toward the exit. Behind him, he could hear shouting, sirens in the distance, the chaos he'd left in his wake. He burst through the front doors of Lincoln High just as 3 fire trucks pulled into the parking lot. Paramedics were already setting up a triage area, expecting casualties from what they probably thought was a gas explosion. Marcus kept running. His house was only 6 blocks away, but he didn't go home. Instead, he found himself at Millennium Park, sitting on a bench near the lake, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The October wind cut through his wet clothes, but he barely felt cold. The heat was still there, coiled in his chest like a sleeping snake. His phone buzzed constantly. Text messages from classmates, missed calls from his parents, probably frantic voicemails from the school. He ignored them all. Hours passed. The sun began to set, painting the lake in shades of orange and red that reminded him too much of flames. Finally, as darkness crept across the city, Marcus forced himself to stand. He had to go home eventually, had to face whatever came next. His parents were waiting in the living room when he walked through the front door. His mother, Sarah, jumped up from the couch the moment she saw him, her nurse's training evident as she immediately began checking him for injuries. His father, David, stood more slowly, his expression unreadable. "Marcus, thank God," his mother said, running her hands over his arms and face. "The school called. They said there was an accident, an explosion. Are you hurt? Why are your clothes wet?" Marcus looked at his father, and something in the older man's eyes made his stomach drop. David Chen had always been quiet, thoughtful, but now he looked afraid. "Dad?" Marcus said. "What's wrong?" David glanced at his wife, then back at his son. "Sarah, maybe you should." "No." Sarah straightened, crossing her arms. "Whatever this is about, I'm not leaving. Marcus is my son too." David sighed, suddenly looking much older than his 45 years. "Sit down, both of you. There are things I should have told you a long time ago." They gathered around the kitchen table, the same one where Marcus had eaten breakfast that morning when his biggest worry was a history test. Everything felt different now, like the world had shifted on its axis and nothing would ever be the same. "Your grandfather," David began slowly. "Your mother's father, Wang Wei. What do you remember about him?" Marcus frowned. His grandfather had died when he was 8, but he remembered a tall, serious man who always seemed to be watching everything around him. He was from China originally. "Came here in the 60s. He used to tell me stories about dragons." "They weren't stories," David said quietly. Sarah was staring at her husband like he'd lost his mind. "David, what are you talking about?" "The Chen family line goes back over 1,000 years in China," David continued. "We were guardians, protectors of something that was supposed to stay hidden. But we failed. We all failed." Marcus felt the heat stirring in his chest again. Failed at what? David reached across the table and took his son's hand. Marcus's skin was fever-hot to the touch, but David didn't flinch. At keeping the dragon blood dormant, at making sure this day would never come. Before anyone could respond, the windows began to rattle. At first, it felt like a truck passing by, but the vibration grew stronger, deeper. The dishes in the cabinets started to clink together. Car alarms began wailing up and down the street. David's face went white. "They felt it," he whispered. "They felt the awakening." "Felt what?" Sarah demanded. "David, you're scaring me." The rattling stopped suddenly, leaving an eerie silence. Then, from somewhere high above the house came a sound that made Marcus's blood freeze. It was like wind, but deeper, more rhythmic, like massive wings beating against the night sky. David stood slowly, his hands shaking. "They're here." Marcus joined him at the window, peering up into the darkness. At first, he saw nothing but stars and the faint glow of the city's light pollution. Then a shadow passed across the moon, too large and too graceful to be any aircraft he knew. "What is that?" he breathed. The shadow circled back, lower this time, and Marcus caught a glimpse of scales that gleamed like polished obsidian, of wings that stretched wider than a jumbo jet, of eyes that burned like golden suns in the darkness. "That," David said, his voice barely audible, "is your heritage coming to collect you." The dragon landed in the street outside their house, with surprising grace for something so massive. Streetlights exploded from the force of its wings, plunging the neighborhood into darkness. Car windows shattered from its roar. And in that terrible sound, Marcus heard something that made his knees weak. Recognition. The dragon wasn't just any creature. It knew him. It had come for him specifically. Through the broken window, a voice spoke directly into his mind, ancient and patient and utterly alien. "Child of fire, child of sky, child of the first flame. Too long have you hidden among the earth crawlers. Too long have you forgotten what you are. Come to us, hatchling. Come home." Marcus felt his body responding before his mind could process what was happening. The heat in his chest expanded, flowing through every cell, changing him from the inside out. His vision sharpened until he could see individual scales on the dragon's hide. His hearing became so acute that he could distinguish every heartbeat in the surrounding houses. And somewhere deep in his DNA, in the parts of himself that had been sleeping for 16 years, ancient memories began to stir. Memories of soaring through starlit skies, of breathing fire that could melt mountains, of a time when Earth was young and dragons ruled both land and space. "Marcus," his mother whispered behind him, "what's happening to you?" He turned to look at her and saw his reflection in her terrified eyes. His pupils had become vertical slits. Small scales were emerging along his jawline. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that human vocal cords shouldn't be able to produce. "I don't know," he said, "but I think I'm about to find out." Outside, the dragon waited with infinite patience. It had traveled across light years to reach this moment, following the scent of awakened fire, and it would not leave without its prize. The first phase of Marcus Chen's transformation was complete. The dragon blood that had slept in his veins for 16 years was fully awake now, rewriting his genetic code with every heartbeat. Soon, he would have to choose: remain human and risk destroying himself from the inside out, or embrace his true nature and leave everything he'd ever known behind. But that choice would have to wait, because through the darkness Marcus could see more shadows circling overhead. The dragon in the street wasn't alone. They had come in force, these children of stars and flame, to reclaim what had always belonged to them. And somewhere in the depths of space, on ships that moved between dimensions, other ancient beings were taking notice. The dragons had broken their long exile. The old treaties were void. Humanity was about to discover they were not alone in the universe. And they were definitely not at the top of the food chain. The dragon's mental voice filled Marcus's head, like thunder rolling across mountains. Every word carried weight that seemed to press against his skull from the inside. But what disturbed him most wasn't the alien nature of the communication, it was how familiar it felt, like remembering a song from childhood. "Do not resist the change, young one," the voice continued. "Your human shell was always temporary. A cocoon for what you truly are." Marcus's father grabbed his shoulder, spinning him away from the window. "Don't listen to it. That's not what you are, Marcus. You're human. You're my son." But even as David spoke, Marcus could see the doubt creeping into his eyes, because the changes were accelerating now. Marcus's fingernails had hardened into claws, and his skin was taking on a faint metallic sheen. When he breathed, small puffs of smoke escaped his nostrils. Outside, the massive dragon lowered its head until one golden eye was level with the broken window. The pupil alone was larger than Marcus's entire body. When it blinked, the sound was like a massive leather sail snapping in the wind. "David Chen," the dragon said. And now its voice was audible, resonating through the air with harmonics that made the remaining windows vibrate. "Guardian of the seventh generation. Keeper of oaths your ancestors swore in blood and flame. You have failed in your duty." David's face crumpled. "I know. God help me, I know." Marcus looked between his father and the dragon, pieces of a puzzle he didn't understand clicking into place. What duty? What oaths? Sarah Chen had retreated to the far corner of the kitchen, her medical training warring with disbelief as she watched her son transform before her eyes. "This isn't possible," she whispered. "Dragons don't exist. They're myths. Stories." The dragon's attention shifted to her, and its expression, if such an alien face could have expressions, seemed almost pitying. "Human female, your species has forgotten much in the passing millennia. But forgetting does not unmake truth. Your mate's bloodline stretches back to the first compact between dragon and human. When we departed your world, we left our children in their care, sleeping until we returned." "Children?" Marcus felt his voice crack, though it came out deeper than it should have. "You are dragonborn," the creature explained. "Not fully human, never fully human, though you have lived among them. Your DNA carries the legacy of the starflights, the deep fires, the songs that shaped worlds, but the blood was bound, suppressed, hidden beneath layers of human genetics, until today, when emotion and instinct broke those bonds." More shadows passed overhead. Marcus counted at least a dozen distinct silhouettes, each one massive, each one circling the neighborhood with predatory patience. House lights were flickering on all around them, as people emerged to investigate the disturbance. "How many?" David asked, his voice hollow. "All of us," the dragon replied. "Every ship, every clan, every survivor of the Great Flight." We felt the awakening from beyond the outer rim, the first flame lit in 3,000 years, calling us home. Marcus's mind reeled. Great Flight? Survivors? The dragon's eyes grew distant, and for a moment, Marcus felt an echo of vast sorrow through their connection. "Your species forced us to leave." "Not through war. We could have reduced your continents to ash, but through something far more insidious. You bred us out." "I don't understand. Dragon genetics are adaptive. When we mate with other species, our offspring carry the best traits of both lineages. Your ancestors discovered this, and they saw opportunity. They seduced our young, bred with them, created hybrid bloodlines that combine dragon power with human cunning." David's face was ashen. The Guardian families. They weren't protecting the dragon blood. They were cultivating it, until the hybrids grew numerous enough to threaten us. Pure-blood dragons became a minority on our own world. So we made the choice to leave, to find new worlds, new purposes. But we bound the hybrid bloodlines first, made them dormant, swore the Guardian families to keep them sleeping. A new sound cut through the night. Helicopters approaching fast from the east. Marcus could see their searchlights sweeping across the city, heading straight for their neighborhood. "The authorities are coming," Sarah said, finding her voice. "Marcus, we have to get you to a hospital. Whatever this is, it can't be real." The dragon's laugh was like a volcano learning to chuckle. "Human medicine cannot help him now. The change has begun and cannot be stopped. He will either complete the transformation or die from the attempt." "No." Marcus stepped toward the window, his new claws clicking against the floor. "There has to be a third option." "Child," the dragon said gently, "you breathed starfire today. Your human classmates saw the flame that shaped solar winds. Do you believe their governments will simply let you return to your previous life?" As if summoned by the creature's words, the helicopters crested the horizon. Military birds, Marcus realized, not police or news crews, and they weren't alone. Convoy of black vehicles was racing through the streets toward their house. "They're coming for me," Marcus said. David grabbed his son's arms, ignoring the heat radiating from his skin. "Listen to me. There are safe houses. Places the Guardians prepared for this day. We can hide you, keep you protected while we figure out what's happening." "Hide?" The dragon's voice carried amusement and contempt in equal measure. "Guardian, your safe houses were built to contain sleeping bloodlines. This hatchling burns with awakened fire. Your concrete and steel will not hold him." More dragons were landing now, their massive forms crushing cars and cracking pavement. Marcus could see people fleeing their houses, screaming as they ran through the streets. But he also noticed something else. Not everyone was running. Some people, maybe 1 in 50, were standing still, staring up at the dragons with expressions of wonder rather than fear. "The other bloodlines," he breathed. "There are others like me. Hundreds of thousands scattered across your world," the dragon confirmed. "Most still sleeping, but the proximity of our return will begin to wake them. The Guardian's bindings weaken with each passing hour." The first helicopter reached their neighborhood, its spotlight sweeping across the gathered dragons. Military personnel fast roped down from the aircraft, that they weren't moving like a rescue operation. They had weapons drawn, tactical gear that suggested they'd been preparing for this scenario. "How did they know to come?" Marcus asked. David's shoulders slumped. "Because the Guardian families never truly kept the secret. We reported to someone. We always reported to someone." Before Marcus could ask what that meant, the front door exploded inward. Armed figures in black tactical gear poured into the house, their weapons trained on the family. But these weren't normal soldiers, Marcus realized. They moved with inhuman speed and precision. Their eyes reflected light like nocturnal predators. "Stand down, citizens," their leader commanded. She was a tall woman with platinum blonde hair and pale skin that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. When she spoke, Marcus caught the hint of an accent he couldn't place. "This is now a federal matter under the Anomalous Persons Act." "There is no Anomalous Persons Act," Sarah protested. The woman smiled, revealing teeth that were slightly too sharp. "There is now." Outside, the dragon that had been communicating with Marcus rose to its full height. The movement created winds that shattered every remaining window on the street. "Arcturus agents," it rumbled. "I should have known the ice runners would involve themselves. Arcturuses." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow, though he couldn't say why. Something in his awakening memories screamed warnings about that word. "Step away from the hybrid," the lead agent commanded. "By order of the Interstellar Compact, all dragon-born individuals are to be secured for processing." The dragon's response shook the entire neighborhood. "The compact was voided when you failed to honor its terms. The Ice Runners have no authority here." Ice Runners. Marcus filed that term away with all the other impossible things he'd learned in the past few hours. But before he could ask for explanations, his body made the choice for him. The change that had been building inside him reached a tipping point. Heat exploded through his nervous system like lightning made of fire. His spine extended, his shoulder blades cracked and reshaped, and something erupted from his back in a spray of blood and golden light. Wings. Actual, functional wings, scaled and powerful, and impossibly real. The Arcturus agents raised their weapons, strange devices that hummed with energy and left frost patterns in the air. But Marcus was faster than they expected. His new reflexes carried him through the broken window before they could fire, and he found himself standing in the street next to the massive dragon that had called him home. "Impressive," the creature said. "Most hybrids require weeks to achieve partial transformation. You accomplished it in hours." Marcus flexed his wings experimentally, marveling at the sensation. "It feels natural," the dragon finished. "Because it is. Now, hatchling, you face the same choice your ancestors faced 3 millennia ago. Remain bound to this world and its limitations, or embrace the infinite sky." Behind them, more Arcturus agents were emerging from the damaged house, dragging his parents with them. Sarah was unconscious. They'd hit her with some kind of sedative weapon. David was struggling against his restraints, shouting Marcus's name. "Let them go," Marcus demanded. "They are Guardian bloodline," the lead agent replied. "They will be processed according to protocol." "What protocol? What gives you the right?" The woman's smile turned predatory. "The same right that's governed this world since your kind first drew breath. The strong rule the weak. And we have been the strong for a very long time." Around them, the other dragons were growing restless. Marcus could feel their anger like heat radiating from forge fires. They had come expecting a reunion, not a war. "Agent Christoph," the dragon rumbled. "Still hiding behind authority you do not possess. Still pretending your people saved this world instead of conquering it." Agent Christoph's composure cracked slightly. "The Glacian Empire brought order to chaos. We ended the Dragon Wars, we protected humanity from your kind's excesses. You ended nothing," another dragon called from across the street. This one was smaller, sleeker, with scales that shifted from deep purple to midnight blue. "You simply waited until we left voluntarily, then claimed credit for our absence." Marcus was trying to follow the conversation, but the political implications kept getting derailed by more immediate concerns. More helicopters were arriving, and he could see military vehicles establishing a perimeter around the entire neighborhood. Whatever was happening here, it was bigger than just his personal transformation. "How long?" he asked. "How long have there been aliens on Earth?" Agent Christoph laughed. "Aliens? Child, we were here before your species learned to make fire. The Classian Empire seeded dozens of worlds, including this one. Humanity evolved under our guidance, our protection." "Guidance?" the first dragon snarled. "You mean slavery." "We prefer the term stewardship," Christoph replied coolly. "And it has been quite successful. Humans have flourished under our care. They've achieved technological advancement, social stability, population growth. They've achieved domestication," the dragon countered, "like cattle bred for optimal yield." Marcus felt sick. "You're saying humanity has been livestock this whole time?" "Not livestock," Christoph said. "Partners. Junior partners, granted, but partners nonetheless. The Glacian Empire has invested considerable resources in human development. We cannot allow that investment to be jeopardized by the return of chaotic elements. Chaotic elements meaning dragons, meaning anyone who threatens the established order." The standoff stretched taut as bowstring. Marcus could feel tension building in the air like the moment before a thunderstorm. His parents were hostages, the dragons were outnumbered by arriving military forces, and somewhere in the distance, air raid sirens were beginning to wail across Chicago. Then, Sarah Chen opened her eyes. Whatever sedative the Arcturus agents had used on her wasn't designed for human physiology that had been exposed to dragon hormones for 16 years. She'd been breathing Marcus's transformed pheromones since the moment he was born, and her system had developed resistances. She came awake with a clarity that surprised everyone, including herself. And the first thing she did was bite the agent holding her. Not a human bite, a bite that drew blood and left crescent-shaped puncture wounds that steamed in the cold air. Impossible, Christoph breathed. She's not bloodline. We checked the genealogies. Marcus stared at his mother as small scales appeared along her neck. Her eyes were shifting from brown to molten gold, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't produce. No, Sarah said, her words coming out like controlled flame. I'm not dragon bloodline, but I've been living with one for 16 years, breathing his air, sharing his dreams. And it turns out dragon genetics are even more adaptive than you thought. She looked at Marcus, and he saw something in her expression that hadn't been there before. Understanding, acceptance, and beneath it all, a growing fire that matched his own. Horizontal gene transfer, she continued, her medical training providing context for the impossible. Extended exposure to retroviruses in dragon pheromones. I've been changing too, just more slowly. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. If proximity to awakened dragon blood could trigger transformation in pure humans, then every person in the affected area was potentially at risk, or potentially evolving. Agent Christoph raised her weapon directly at Sarah's head. This ends now. She never got the chance to fire. Because in that moment, every person within a 3-block radius who had been standing calmly among the chaos suddenly looked up at the sky and smiled. The hidden bloodlines, the ones who hadn't run when the dragons arrived, were waking up all at once. And Marcus realized that his transformation hadn't just been personal, it had been a signal, a beacon that was calling to something sleeping in human DNA across the entire world. The real war was just beginning. The transformation wave hit Chicago like a tsunami made of fire and scales. Marcus watched in stunned amazement as people across the neighborhood began to change. A soccer mom 3 houses down sprouted claws that could cut steel. The elderly man who walked his dog past their house every morning grew wings that spanned 20 feet. 2 teenagers who'd been taking selfies near the chaos suddenly roared in perfect harmony, their voices carrying frequencies that shattered windows for blocks around. Phase transition, the lead dragon explained, its mental voice calm despite the chaos. When enough dormant bloodlines activate in proximity, they create a resonance cascade. Every hybrid within the frequency range begins awakening simultaneously. Agent Christoph was screaming orders into her radio, but her tactical team was struggling to adapt. They'd come prepared to contain one rogue dragonborn, not hundreds. And the newly awakened weren't just changing, they were organizing. Marcus felt it happening in his own mind. New thoughts that weren't entirely his own, shared memories from people he'd never met. Tactical awareness that came from somewhere beyond individual consciousness. The dragonborn were networking, their minds linking through channels that human neurology shouldn't support. Collective intelligence, Sarah said, her own transformation accelerating as she spoke. Scales were spreading up her arms now, and her fingernails had become proper claws. It's like we're becoming nodes in some kind of biological internet. The first dragon lowered its head toward Marcus. Not becoming, hatchling, remembering. This is how we once were, before the Ice Runners divided us, before the Guardians bound us, before we forgot that strength comes from unity. Through the growing network, Marcus could sense other awakening sites across the globe. New York, where a Wall Street executive was breathing fire in a board meeting while his colleagues discovered they could fly. London, where a university student was reshaping metal with her bare hands while her professor grew scales and suddenly remembered languages that predated human civilization. Tokyo, Mumbai, Sao Paulo, everywhere, the sleeping bloodlines were stirring. But they weren't the only ones responding to the activation signal. Sir, one of the Arcturus agents called to Christoph. We're getting reports from containment facilities worldwide. The stored specimens are showing unprecedented activity. Stored specimens, Marcus felt sick understanding wash over him. You've been collecting people like us. Christoph's expression remained cold. The Anomalous Persons Act has been in classified operation for 70 years. We've maintained facilities for individuals showing signs of non-human genetic variants. To their own protection, of course. Of course, the lead dragon rumbled with bitter amusement. The same protection you offered our ancestors when you convinced them to accept voluntary exile. Marcus was learning to process multiple information streams simultaneously. A side effect of the collective consciousness that was forming among the Dragonborn. Through shared awareness, he could feel the experiences of newly awakened hybrids around the world, and what he was learning made his blood burn with rage. The Glacian Empire hadn't just guided human development, they had actively suppressed it. Every major breakthrough in human technology had been carefully managed, limited, controlled. Wars had been orchestrated to prevent certain populations from advancing too quickly. Diseases had been engineered and released to cull bloodlines that showed too much independence. The Spanish flu, Sarah whispered, her own access to the collective memory revealing terrible truths. The Black Death, they weren't natural outbreaks. Population management, Christoph confirmed without shame. Necessary measures to maintain optimal development curves. Uncontrolled growth leads to chaos. The dragon's roar shook the entire city block. Optimal for whom? Before Christoph could answer, the night sky lit up like a second dawn. But this wasn't sunlight. It was the bright blue-white of spacecraft engines firing in Earth's atmosphere, dozens of them descending from orbit in formation. Reinforcements? Marcus asked. No, the dragon said grimly. Those are Glacian assault ships. They're not here to contain the situation, they're here to end it. The ships were moving faster than anything Marcus had ever seen. They covered the distance from the upper atmosphere to street level in seconds, their energy weapons already charging with ominous humming sounds. But the dragons were faster. The lead dragon spread wings that seemed to stretch for miles and launched itself skyward with a sound like controlled thunder. The others followed, their massive forms rising to meet the descending ships in aerial combat that belonged in ancient legends rather than modern reality. Fire met energy beams in the darkness above Chicago. The sound was indescribable. Like music composed by gods of war, beautiful and terrible and absolutely overwhelming, explosions bloomed like deadly flowers against the night, each one bright enough to cast shadows for miles. On the ground, the newly awakened Dragonborn were facing their own battles. More Arcturus agents were arriving by the minute, but they weren't just Glacian operatives anymore. Marcus could sense something different about the newer arrivals. Something that made his emerging instincts scream warnings. Hunters, Sarah said, her own awakened senses detecting the same threat. They're not here to capture. They're here to exterminate. The hunters moved with predatory grace that reminded Marcus uncomfortably of the dragons overhead. But where dragon movement was fluid and natural, these beings felt artificial, engineered. They wore no visible armor, but energy weapons seemed to bounce harmlessly off their pale skin. Enhanced humans, David explained. He'd been silent during the chaos, but now his guardian training was asserting itself. The Glacians have been experimenting with human genetics for decades, creating super soldiers to deal with exactly this kind of situation. One of the hunters approached their group, its movements eerily smooth. Up close, Marcus could see that its skin wasn't quite right, too perfect, too uniform, like it had been grown in a laboratory rather than developed naturally. Dragon-born specimens, it said in a voice that sounded like winter wind over frozen lakes. Submit for processing or be terminated. Marcus felt heat building in his chest, the flame that had started this entire nightmare. I vote for option 3. He breathed fire directly into the hunter's face. The creature didn't burn. Instead, it absorbed the flames, its skin glowing briefly before returning to normal. Then it smiled, revealing teeth that were definitely not human. Thermal energy converted to biomass enhancement, it explained conversationally. Your fire makes us stronger. It moved faster than Marcus could track, one hand lashing out toward his throat. But Sarah was faster, her own claws intercepting the attack with a spray of sparks, as enhanced nails met whatever the hunter's skin was made of. Biological nanotech, she observed with clinical detachment, even as she fought for their lives. They've replaced human cells with some kind of adaptive machinery. Around them, other Dragonborn were discovering the same thing. Their natural abilities, fire, flight, enhanced strength and speed, were being countered by hunters specifically designed to neutralize dragon genetics. It was clear this wasn't a spontaneous response. The Glacians had been preparing for this day for decades, but they hadn't prepared for everything. Through the collective consciousness, Marcus felt a surge of information from Dragonborn around the world. Many of the awakening hybrids weren't just developing traditional dragon abilities. Their human genetics were creating new combinations, novel adaptations that the ancient bloodlines had never possessed. A teenager in Berlin had discovered she could phase through solid matter. A grandfather in Kenya was manipulating gravity with his thoughts. Twin sisters in Vancouver were sharing consciousness across thousands of miles, creating an instantaneous communication network that spanned continents. Humanity's gift for innovation was combining with dragon genetics to create something unprecedented, something the Glacians hadn't anticipated. They underestimated us, Marcus realized, dodging another hunter attack while his own abilities continued to evolve. His fire was getting hotter, more focused, and he was learning to shape it with precision that surprised him. They think we're just diluted dragons, but we're something new. The hunter facing him paused, its artificial features showing what might have been confusion.
Impossible.
Hybrid genetics follow predictable patterns. You cannot exceed your base parameters. Watch me, Marcus replied. This time, instead of breathing simple fire, he concentrated on the molecular structure of the flames themselves. Heat was just energy. Energy could be shaped, directed, transformed. If these hunters absorbed thermal energy, then maybe he could give them more than they could handle. The fire that erupted from his lungs wasn't red or orange or even blue-white. It was a perfect cylinder of plasma hot enough to ionize air molecules, focused into a beam narrow enough to thread a needle. It hit the hunter's center mass and passed completely through it, leaving the perfect circular hole that glowed around the edges like a miniature star. The hunter looked down at the wound with what might have been surprise. Then it collapsed, its artificial biology finally encountering something it couldn't adapt to fast enough. Stellar core temperatures, Sarah observed with professional interest. Around 15 million Kelvin. How did you even survive generating that? Marcus looked at his hands, which should have been charred to bone by the energy he'd just channeled. Instead, they were glowing faintly, scales reflecting heat like mirrors. I don't think I'm entirely human anymore. Above them, the air battle was intensifying. More Glacian ships were arriving, but so were dragons from distant star systems. The sky over Chicago had become a war zone between forces that had been enemies for millennia. And on the ground, the hunters were discovering that their perfect adaptations weren't quite perfect enough. Dragonborn around the world were developing countermeasures, sharing solutions through their growing collective consciousness, evolving in real time to meet each new threat. But Marcus could sense something else building through the network. Fear. Not from the Dragonborn themselves, but from the cities around them. Governments were mobilizing, military forces were converging on every awakening site. The secret war that had been hidden for centuries was about to become very public. They're going to blame us, he realized. When the world sees dragons and aliens fighting over major cities, they're going to think we're the invasion. Through the collective, other Dragonborn were reaching the same conclusion. They were caught between ancient enemies in a conflict that predated human civilization, and their own species was about to mark them as the threat. Then we need to control the narrative, Sarah said firmly. She'd stopped trying to deny what was happening and had fully embraced her transformation. If we're going to survive this, we need humanity to understand that we're not the enemy. Agent Christoph, who had been organizing hunter teams throughout the battle, overheard and laughed. Control the narrative? Child, by morning, every major news network will be running footage of dragons burning cities and monsters emerging from suburban neighborhoods. Your kind will be branded terrorists, and humans will beg us to protect them. Maybe, Marcus agreed. Or maybe humans will remember why every culture in history told stories about dragon slayers. Maybe they'll remember that they never needed anyone to protect them. Through the collective consciousness, he reached out to Dragonborn around the world. Not just to share tactical information, but to coordinate something larger. Something that would change everything. If humanity was about to learn that they weren't alone in the universe, then they deserved to learn the whole truth. About the Glacian Empire. About the centuries of hidden control. About the fact that dragon genetics weren't an alien invasion. They were humanity's birthright, finally awakening after millennia of suppression. The war in the skies was just the beginning. The real battle would be for the hearts and minds of 8 billion humans who were about to discover that everything they thought they knew about their world was a carefully constructed lie. And somewhere in the depths of space, ancient powers that made both dragons and Glacians look like children were beginning to take notice of Earth. The awakening had attracted more attention than anyone realized. The hidden war was about to become very public indeed. The first news broadcasts began at 3:47 a.m. Central Time. Marcus watched the reports streaming in through the collective consciousness as Dragonborn around the world accessed human communication networks with abilities their species had never possessed. Every major city was experiencing similar scenes: dragons in the sky, transformed humans in the streets, and military responses that seemed far too well coordinated to be spontaneous. This is Sarah Chen reporting from the University of Chicago Medical Center, his mother said into a commandeered news camera. She'd convinced a local TV crew to follow her through the chaos, using her medical credentials and newly awakened charisma to gain their trust. What you're seeing across the world tonight isn't an invasion, it's a revelation. The collective had decided that the truth needed to come from trusted human sources, not from dragons or awakened hybrids who could easily be dismissed as compromised. Sarah's medical background, David's academic credentials, and similar figures worldwide were becoming the voice of disclosure. For 70 years, she continued, scales glinting along her neck as the camera captured her transformation in real time, humanity has been living under the control of an extraterrestrial empire. The Glacian regime has suppressed our technological development, engineered our conflicts, and eliminated bloodlines that showed too much independence. On screens around the world, similar broadcasts were beginning. Dr. Elizabeth Warren Kim from MIT was explaining the genetic evidence. Professor Johann Schmidt from Oxford was presenting historical documentation. Each revelation backed by evidence that the collective consciousness was retrieving from previously classified government databases. The Dragonborn weren't just awakening physically, they were awakening informationally, their hybrid minds capable of interfacing with human technology in ways that bypassed every security protocol ever designed. They're hacking everything, Agent Christoph snarled, watching her carefully constructed information control crumble in real time. Military networks, government databases, corporate communications. This is exactly why hybrid consciousness cannot be permitted. Marcus felt the collective's response to her words. Not anger, but something far more dangerous. Understanding. The Dragonborn were learning about the Glacian Empire's methods through the Empire's own records, and what they found was systematically enraging 8 billion humans. Population control through engineered pandemics, economic manipulation to prevent technological advancement, wars orchestrated to eliminate rebellious genetic lineages, the assassination of human leaders who discovered the truth. 3 centuries of careful management designed to keep humanity in a state of controlled development. The cancer rates in industrial cities, one of the newly awakened reported through the network. They weren't from pollution, they were from targeted genetic degradation protocols. The failure of the space program after the moon landing, another added. They sabotaged our expansion attempts to keep us planet-bound. Every economic recession, every resource shortage, every social conflict that seemed to come from nowhere, the collective consciousness was painting a picture of systematic oppression that made every human injustice in recorded history look like preparation for this moment. And as the evidence spread through social media, through news broadcasts, through emergency communication systems that the Dragonborn had appropriated, humanity's response began to shift from fear to rage. Above Chicago, the air battle had evolved into something resembling aerial ballet, performed with weapons capable of cracking continents. Dragons wove between Glacian assault ships with impossible grace, their fire hot enough to melt armor that should have been impervious. But the ships kept coming, wave after wave of them, as if the Empire had been preparing for this conflict for decades. How many ships do they have? Marcus asked the lead dragon during a brief lull in the fighting. More than we anticipated, came the grim response. The Glacian Empire has been building for this day since we left. They knew we would eventually return. Through the collective, Marcus could sense similar battles raging over every major population center on Earth. But the dragons weren't fighting alone anymore. Human military forces that had initially responded to contain the dragon threat were beginning to redirect their attention toward Glacian assets as the truth became undeniable. Sir, a voice crackled over abandoned military radio frequencies. We're getting reports that those black site facilities we've been supplying, they're not human operations. Genetic analysis confirms the personnel are non-terrestrial in origin. Confirmed here as well, General. Whatever those ice-pale bastards are, they're not us. Marcus felt a surge of hope through the collective. Humanity was adapting to the revelation faster than anyone had expected. But then new contacts appeared on radar screens around the world, and hope turned to ice in his veins. Additional ships approaching from deep space, the lead dragon reported. But these aren't Glacian configurations. Marcus looked up to see new silhouettes against the stars. These vessels were larger than the Glacian assault ships, their hulls reflecting starlight in patterns that hurt to look at directly. And they were broadcasting on frequencies that made every dragonborn on Earth suddenly go very, very still. What is it? Sarah asked, noticing the change in her son's posture. I don't know, Marcus replied, but every instinct I've developed tonight is screaming at me to hide. Through the collective consciousness came a single word, shared by every awakened dragonborn simultaneously. Anathema. The new ships moved differently than either the dragons or the Glacians. Where dragons flowed and Glacians cut through space with mechanical precision, these vessels seemed to fold reality around themselves, appearing and disappearing in ways that violated several laws of physics. Void runners, the lead dragon explained, its mental voice carrying notes of ancient terror. We thought them extinct. They were the reason we first left our homeworld long before we came to Earth. Another alien species? Not alien. Something else. Something that feeds on consciousness itself, that harvests the thoughts and dreams of entire civilizations. The dragons and glacians have fought each other for millennia, but we have always united against the Void Runners. As if responding to their name, the new ships began broadcasting on every frequency simultaneously. The message appeared on television screens, computer monitors, phone displays, even on digital billboards across every awakening city. Consciousness bloom detected. Civilization status harvestable. Initiate collection protocols. The message was accompanied by images that bypassed optical processing entirely, appearing directly in the minds of every sapient being on Earth. Vast ships consuming entire star systems. Beings of living shadow extracting something essential from screaming populations. Worlds left empty, not destroyed, but somehow hollowed out, as if everything that made them meaningful had been eaten. The awakening, Marcus realized with growing horror. Our collective consciousness. It's like a beacon to them. Yes, the lead dragon confirmed. Exponential intelligence growth in a developing species. To the Void Runners, it represents the ripest possible harvest. They will consume every thinking mind on this world if we don't stop them. Around the world, the hidden war suddenly became irrelevant. Dragons and glacians found themselves forced into alliance against a threat that made their ancient conflicts seem like childhood squabbles. But their combined forces had been designed to fight each other, not entities that existed partially outside conventional reality. We need human help, Agent Christoph admitted, her superior attitude finally cracking. Our technology isn't designed for this kind of threat. Neither is ours, the lead dragon replied. But the hybrids, they represent something neither pure dragon nor pure glacian genetics could achieve alone. Marcus felt the collective consciousness reaching out, connecting not just Dragonborn but every human mind touched by the awakening process. His mother, who had been exposed to dragon pheromones for 16 years. His father, whose guardian bloodline carried genetic memories stretching back millennia. Even ordinary humans who had been in proximity to the awakening were beginning to develop enhanced cognitive abilities. We're becoming a gestalt intelligence, Sarah observed, her medical training providing context for the impossible. Not just Dragonborn, but the entire human species. The awakening isn't just affecting dormant bloodlines, it's catalyzing evolution across the whole population. The implications were staggering. 8 billion human minds linked by dragon genetics, guided by glacian technology, unified by the shared threat of extinction. It represented a form of consciousness that had never existed before, vast enough to encompass entire continents, diverse enough to approach problems from millions of different angles simultaneously, and the Void Runners were coming to harvest it. The first Void ship reached Earth's atmosphere just as Marcus felt the final barriers in his mind dissolve. He wasn't just connected to the Dragonborn collective anymore, he was connected to his entire species. Every human dream, every brilliant insight, every creative spark that had ever pushed humanity forward was suddenly part of him. Through 8 billion pairs of eyes, he watched the Void ship descend toward New York City. Its hull wasn't solid matter, but something that shifted between states, sometimes transparent, sometimes reflective, sometimes appearing to be made of crystallized darkness. When it moved, reality seemed to bend around it like light around a black hole. But humanity was no longer the same species that had been hiding from cosmic forces. The awakening had given them tools they'd never possessed before, perspectives that transcended individual consciousness. And for the first time since the crisis began, Marcus felt something that surprised him. Confidence. They're expecting a typical civilization, he said, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated across the Gestalt network. Individual minds, competing interests, limited coordination. But we're not typical anymore. Through the collective, every human on Earth began to understand their situation with perfect clarity. The Glacian Empire's centuries of oppression. The Dragon's protective exile. The Void Runners' intent to harvest their consciousness. And most importantly, their own potential to transcend all of it. We evolved under pressure, Sarah added, her words reaching billions of minds simultaneously. Every challenge humanity has faced has made us stronger, more adaptable. The Glacians tried to control that evolution, but they couldn't stop it. They just delayed it until we were ready for something like this. The Void ship's harvesting beam reached ground level in Manhattan, and 8 million minds suddenly went silent. But they didn't disappear. They merged, their consciousness flowing into the global Gestalt, like streams feeding a vast river. The Void Runners had expected to consume individual thoughts, not encounter a unified intelligence that grew stronger with each mind they tried to drain. Unexpected resistance, the Void Ship broadcast. Consciousness exhibits collective behavior, updating protocols. But updating protocols took time, and humanity was learning faster than their enemies could adapt. Dragonfire, guided by human innovation, was cutting through Void Ship hulls. Glacian energy weapons modified by human engineering were disrupting the entity's reality-bending abilities. And the Gestalt intelligence was coordinating defenses across the entire planet with response times measured in milliseconds. The war had begun in earnest. But for the first time since the awakening started, Marcus felt like they might actually win. The question was what they would become in the process, and whether the thing that survived would still be recognizably human at all. The Battle of Earth lasted 18 hours and 17 minutes. Marcus experienced every second of it through the Gestalt consciousness that now connected every thinking mind on the planet. He felt the moment when the Void Runner's harvesting beam touched his neighbor's thoughts in Manhattan. He shared the terror and wonder of a child in Mumbai who discovered she could bend space with her imagination. He tasted the determination of elderly humans in retirement homes across Europe who suddenly found themselves capable of tactical planning that would have made military strategists weep with envy. Humanity was no longer a species. They had become something unprecedented, a collective intelligence that retained individual personality and creativity while sharing knowledge, experience, and capability across 8 billion minds. And they were winning. Void Runner vessels in retreat from Sector 7 reported a voice that belonged to everyone and no one, speaking through the global network. Their consciousness harvesting protocols are completely ineffective against distributed intelligence. The Void Runners had evolved to consume civilizations that thought in terms of separate minds competing for resources. They fed on the fear and isolation that came with individual consciousness facing cosmic threats alone. But humanity wasn't alone anymore, and their fear had transformed into something far more dangerous: coordinated fury. Marcus watched through 1,000 eyes as human ingenuity merged with dragonfire and Glacian technology to create weapons that shouldn't have been possible. A grandmother in Tokyo was using her knitting needles to weave electromagnetic fields that disrupted void ship propulsion. A teenager in Sao Paulo had discovered how to make his skateboard fly by manipulating gravitational constants. Across the planet, ordinary humans were performing miracles by thinking together in ways no species ever had before. The collective is stabilizing, Sarah reported from her position at the University of Chicago, where she was coordinating the biological aspects of humanity's transformation. Individual consciousness remains intact within the larger framework. We're not losing our humanity, we're expanding it. Through the network, Marcus could feel the truth of her words. He was still himself, still Marcus Chen. Still the confused teenager who'd accidentally breathed fire in chemistry class. But he was also more. He carried the memories of every human who had ever dreamed of flying, the accumulated knowledge of every scientist who had ever wondered about the stars, the creative spark of every artist who had ever imagined something beautiful. The dragons had given humanity the fire, the Glacians had provided the forge. But what emerged from that combination was uniquely human, adaptive, innovative, and absolutely unpredictable. Final Void Runner ships departing Sol system. Came the network-wide announcement. Interception protocols unsuccessful. Prey species exhibits unprecedented collective resistance. Agent Christoph, who had spent the last 18 hours fighting alongside the people she'd been trying to control just hours before, lowered her energy weapon with something that might have been relief. I've never seen the Void Runners retreat so quickly. That's because they've never encountered anything like us, the lead dragon replied. Its massive form was battered from the battle, scales scarred by void energy, but its golden eyes burned with something that hadn't been there before. Pride, perhaps. Or hope. Marcus flexed wings that no longer felt alien, scales that had become as natural as skin. Around him, other Dragonborn were experiencing their own moments of integration. The panic and confusion of transformation had given way to acceptance, then mastery, then something beyond both. So what happens now? He asked. The question rippled through the Gestalt, carrying weight far beyond his individual curiosity. The answer came from 8 billion minds thinking together. They would rebuild. Not just cities damaged in the battle, not just governments disrupted by the revelation of alien influence, but everything. Humanity had been living under artificial constraints for centuries, their development carefully managed by beings who viewed them as resources rather than partners. Now those constraints were gone. The Glacian Empire maintained control through information limitation, David Chen observed. His Guardian training was being recontextualized through the global network. Generations of hidden knowledge finally finding its proper place. They gave us technology slowly, carefully, always keeping us dependent on their guidance. Through the collective consciousness, humans were accessing scientific principles that should have taken centuries to discover. Dragon genetics had unlocked cognitive abilities that allowed for intuitive understanding of quantum mechanics, stellar engineering, dimensional physics. The knowledge had always been there in the hybrid bloodlines. The Glacians had simply prevented it from emerging. We could have been traveling between stars 500 years ago, a physicist in Geneva realized, his thoughts echoing through the network. The mathematical foundations were already in place. They just made sure we never put the pieces together. Marcus felt the collective's response to that revelation, not despair at what had been lost, but anticipation for what could now be accomplished. Humanity was taking its first steps as a truly spacefaring species, and they would not be taking those steps alone. The Dragon Clans offer alliance, the lead dragon announced formally. Partnership between equals, not guardianship of the young. Your species has proven itself capable of transcending the limitations we thought were permanent. And the Glacian Empire? Agent Christoph asked. She looked different now. The artificial perfection of her enhanced features was softening, becoming more human as her exposure to the Gestalt gradually reversed decades of biological modification. The Empire will adapt or dissolve, came the response from multiple Glacian agents worldwide. Our methods were designed for managing individual civilizations. Collective intelligence renders our control systems obsolete. We must negotiate new terms or face the same fate as the Void Runners. Marcus smiled, feeling the expression multiplied across billions of faces. Humanity would negotiate, but from a position of strength rather than ignorance. They were no longer the junior species being protected by their betters. They were partners in the cosmic community, bringing gifts that no other race possessed. The awakening isn't finished, Sarah added, her medical expertise allowing her to track the ongoing changes. The transformation triggered by proximity to dragon genetics is accelerating. Within a generation, every human will have enhanced capabilities. We're looking at a complete evolutionary leap. And the children? Marcus asked, thinking of the babies who would be born into this new world. The answer came through the collective memory of Dragonborn around the world who were already experiencing the next phase of development. Children born after the awakening wouldn't just carry dormant dragon genetics, they would be native to the Gestalt consciousness, able to access the global network from birth. They would grow up thinking in ways that transcended individual limitation, creating solutions to problems their parents couldn't even conceive. We're going to change everything, Marcus realized. Art, science, philosophy, the way we organize society. All of it is going to be rebuilt from the ground up.
Yes, the dragon replied.
And for the first time in 3 millennia, we're curious to see what you'll create. Through the global network, Marcus could feel humanity beginning to plan. Not the slow, contentious political processes of the past, but true collective decision-making that incorporated the needs and desires of every individual while working toward common goals. They would clean the pollution from their atmosphere within a decade. They would establish permanent colonies on other worlds within a generation. They would solve problems like poverty, disease, and resource scarcity, not through political maneuvering, but through the simple application of 8 billion minds working together. But most importantly, they would remain human. The Gestalt consciousness hadn't replaced individual personality, it had amplified it. Marcus was more himself than he'd ever been, his unique perspective valued as part of the greater whole. Every human retained their capacity for creativity, love, humor, and all the messy, wonderful qualities that made them who they were. There's something else, Jenny Walsh said, stepping out of the crowd of newly awakened humans. Marcus was surprised to see her. He'd lost track of his classmates in the chaos of transformation. She looked different now, scales glinting along her cheekbones, eyes carrying flecks of gold that reflected inner fire. The proximity awakening, she continued. It wasn't random. The dragon genetics were designed to recognize potential. Everyone who awakened was someone who could handle the transformation, psychologically and physically. We're not just randomly selected humans with alien DNA. We're the ones who are ready for this. Through the collective, Marcus felt the truth of her words. The awakening had been selective, choosing individuals based on criteria that went beyond mere genetics. Compassion, creativity, resilience, the capacity for wonder, qualities that would be essential for humanity's next phase of development. A new covenant, the lead dragon said formally, between dragon, human, and hybrid, between individual consciousness and collective wisdom, between what was and what will be. Marcus nodded, feeling the agreement ripple through 8 billion minds. They would honor the past while embracing the future. They would remember the struggles that brought them to this point while working to ensure that no other species would face similar oppression. And if the Void Runners come back? He asked. The answer came from the combined will of Earth's new collective intelligence, carrying the weight of Dragon's ancient fire, humans' endless adaptability, and the hybrid vigor that made both stronger. Let them come. 6 months later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of humanity's first interstellar vessel, watching his home planet shrink to a blue dot against the infinite black of space. The ship itself was a fusion of human innovation, dragon craftsmanship, and reformed Glacian technology. Beautiful, efficient, and completely unlike anything any single species could have created alone. He wasn't alone on the observation deck. Jenny was there, along with dozens of other Dragonborn who had volunteered for the first expedition to the stars. But he was also surrounded by the presence of everyone back on Earth, their consciousness linked across impossible distances, through the Gestalt network that now connected humanity to the galaxy itself. His parents were there in spirit, watching through his eyes, as their son took humanity's first steps toward becoming something greater than they had ever dreamed. The dragons were there, sharing memories of worlds beyond imagination. Even some of the reformed Glacians were part of the network now, their rigid hierarchical thinking gradually softening into something more collaborative. Ready for this? Jenny asked, her hand finding his as they watched the stars wheel around them. Marcus smiled, feeling the expression reflected in 8 billion minds across space and time. He thought about that morning in chemistry class, when his biggest worry had been talking to the girl behind him in English. He thought about the moment he breathed fire and discovered he wasn't entirely human. He thought about the price of truth and the gift of transformation. I've been ready my whole life, he replied. I just didn't know it yet. Behind them, Earth continued its ancient dance around the sun, but its children were no longer bound to a single world. The awakening had given them wings, fire, and the infinite sky, and somewhere in the depths of space, other young civilizations were beginning to dream of stars, carrying the hope that when they were ready to fly, humanity would be there to greet them as equals. The age of hiding was over. The age of wonder had begun.